Okay, so we're going to start this project off by looking at the HTML. So all of the code for this project is available in Moodle in a Word document. So we're going to start by having a look at the HTML and having a look through what it's going to produce. Over here on the right hand side is what it's going to produce in my web browser. You can see there's the basic file with the HTML and the CSS applied. So the things to take note of in terms of the HTML are to make sure that your script source is pointing at the right location, pointing at your correct triangle.js JavaScript file, or whatever you might have called it. My suggestion was triangle.js. That we have linked correctly to the style sheet, the triangle.css style sheet for this project, to make sure that the name is correct. And then we're basically having a look at in the body tag, again using a table here to lay this out, to help us to lay that out. A few things to take note of. Here in this cell here, we're using a TH tag, which is a table header tag. So it's just a special tag other than a standard cell TD tag that basically gives you a bit of highlighting on your content in that cell. So I'm using that in the height, the base, and the area cells. We've got the image loaded into our cell here, and that image is using a row span attribute. That's what's making that one cell merge effectively across all of these cells. So that's important to note. And then also note that the use of classes, so using several classes on a lot of these cells to help our CSS styling. So you've got an image class there, and then I've got on these three cells that are in orange, the CSS coloring is displaying them in that orangey color, the height, the base, and the area. Each of those cells has a class applied to it called header. Okay, so that's for the purpose of the CSS styling. And then these cells here, these two text boxes, I've got applying to them a CSS class, a class called data for those two cells, so that they can get their own unique styling, and they can see I'm styling them with this sort of greenish coloured background, but they are just text boxes that I can type inside of. And then the third class, or another different class again that I'm using, is the class called result. So on the cell that has our result in it, notice that's not using a text box, whereas the other two are using text boxes. It's just a standard cell that's going to display our output, and that's getting a class called result, so it can be styled differently to all of the rest. The other thing to note are for these three cells, so the two cells there with the text boxes and the one with the calculate button, they are all using form input form elements. These two are text boxes, so they are input. They each get an ID. So this one is being called txt height. So txt is short for text box, and so it's got the same name and the same ID, and giving it a certain size with no text inside of it by default. The other one is similar, but it's being called txt base. So that's the name that is being applied to it. So that name is important because it will be used by the JavaScript to accept or to pick up the value that the user enters. And then the other class, the other input element, is the button down the bottom. So the button name is called btn calc. So it's just a name. We've given it with the same ID value, and what it's going to do is there's an event applied to this button, which is an on-click event. So in other words, whenever the user clicks the button, it's going to what it's going to do is actually run a JavaScript function that's called calculate, and that will become useful, or we'll talk more about that when we look at the JavaScript. So that's the fundamental HTML code. So if you go and create that code, you'll get something that looks a bit like this, but it won't be quite as pretty yet because we haven't applied our CSS, and we'll have a look at that in the next video.